For a long time, people have been saying there's all sorts of things you cannot teach utilizing the internet or online education. You can't teach things like medicine using the internet. It's not practical enough, it's not real enough, it's not authentic enough. Thanks. And so as people start to take a look at some of these simulations and examples of things that you can and can't do, it's hard to understand where some of these arguments all come from. This is an optometry piece that was created by the University of California at Davis that teaches exactly how to give an eye exam without having to be in the room. You don't have to sit in a clinic for 3 months in order to see how all of this works. You just get to do it. There are people who say you can't teach physical education online. Even though we have these devices today that you can literally put around your wrist that will tell you how much you're perspiring, what your heart rate is, how much you're walking. My favorite story about this was a high school boy who determined that he didn't want to run in his gym class, so he wrapped one of these around his dog and played fetch for an hour. His parents got a call a little later in the afternoon saying, "We think your son is dying because a dog's heart rate is so much higher than a person's." There are all sorts of things people say you can't teach online. They say you can't teach art online. And finally, you have to stop these people and say, wait, why can't you do these things using that modality? And when I talked to an art teacher, she said, well, art it's not about how hard or soft you push down the pen or pencil. It's about perspective. You can't teach perspective in an online forum. This is called Sketch of a Woman from the Inside Out. It was developed by a Brazilian artist who wanted to begin to teach perspective. So using flash technology, which is ubiquitous today, he is creating a human being. He's putting down the skeleton, then he's going to wrap around that skin, then he'll put on hair, then he'll put on clothing. He is beginning to teach perspective using a medium that we didn't think was possible 10, 20, 30 years ago. I have the opportunity, I'm sorry, I'm going to turn this off, but I'll put it in the deck so you can get it, all right? So you can see it finished. I know you want to see it finished. This is my Wordle. If you were to ask me who I am, and if I were trying to put it in technological means, using Wordle.net, this would be my word cloud. These are the things that make up who I am. I'm a professor. I teach at Chaminade University. I teach communication and rhetoric. I also, obviously you heard I work for Pearson. I direct a research center. All we do is research online learning. At the same time, I've got a 5-year-old, and she is just beginning her own educational journey right now. These are the things that make up who I am, but it's not until you put this into a meaningful pattern that you start to get a sense of this person up here talking to you. Well, what I want to try to do today is talk about learning, because learning today is complex, it's hard, it's deep, it's robust, it's big. There's a lot to it. And while MOOCs have a place, it's a place. There is so much more to learning that we know about today than we've ever known before. I have the opportunity to go around the world talking to educational leaders about neo-millennial patterns and strategies and how they're choosing to use the flip models and how they're choosing to incorporate things like problem-based learning and understanding by design, these sorts of things. And in order to do that, there's a lot of things that we have to tackle. And so for the next about 20 minutes or so, I just want to talk to you about some of these things that I think really need to be tip of mind as we start thinking about technology. We know reform. There are people out talking about reform and have been forever. Dan Pink comes to mind talking about motivation. Some of the guys talking about math and science, like the Wolfram brothers, Stephen Wolfram and Conrad Wolfram, or Dan Meyer talking about how to do it well. Guys like Dean Eccles who are saying to us, you know, we can map your persuasion. We know what persuades you, and we can use that technology with Amazon to actually persuade you the same way over and over again. There are all sorts of people talking about reform in our lives, reform in education, and we know that some of them make great sense. But when I think about reform, I think of things like this. I mentioned my daughter's 5. She's going to school now for the first time, public education. And I know from research that I've done, from even just watching television, there are all of these things surrounding school lunches. I believe Jamie Oliver had a big program that started here in England about this, where he's saying, look, let's not feed our kids chemicals. Let's feed them real food, just actual food you grow out of the ground, not a bunch of chemically processed things, and that makes sense. And people say, oh, okay, yeah, we actually have research that shows that it impacts obesity, that impacts focus, it impacts ability to gain attention, to do well in school. We have this. However, we also know reform, don't we? Because I know that when this sort of information comes out and people say, yeah, let's just have chicken. Let's have regular chicken that comes from chickens, it's not processed. I know that Tyson, who employs 107,000 people in the world, responds to that by saying, you know, We can get 7,200 extra servings per diverted truck of chicken compared to similar chicken patties from other manufacturers. And so to a district superintendent who is listening to that and is saying, well, 7,200 more chicken nuggets for my kids at the same price. It's not black and white anymore, is it? Now all of a sudden it's pretty difficult. You say, well, wait a minute, what about the research that talks about focus? Well, it's not always the case. We don't know that to be 100% true. That makes it cheaper. We know reform. At the same time, we know research. We know things like the circadian rhythms of the human being have a major change around the age of 25. We should not encourage people to try to learn very much in the mornings if they're under 25 years old. And yet we pack those 7 a.m. lectures, those 8 a.m. lectures, those 9 a.m. lectures, even though they can't learn nearly as well at that time of day as they can at other parts of the day. Great research study was done where they actually took an entire school district from 9 through 12, and they allowed those students to go to school for an hour later than they normally went for an entire semester. The average grade went up 9.7%, a full letter grade. At the end of that semester, you know what they did? They said, wow, that's really interesting. We should remember that. Unfortunately, we have to go back to the other way because we have bus schedules and things like that. We know research. We know reform. We just also know that we can't easily implement a lot of it. We know more about the brain than we've ever known before. We know more about how our brain works, how it takes in information. I had the opportunity to meet John Medina, who wrote this book, Brain Rules. I highly recommend it if you've never seen or read it before. I had the opportunity to actually introduce him. And right before I went up to introduce him on stage, he's literally teaching me and the other people at the table. He's the consummate professor. He's teaching about neuroscience and how the brain works. And he said to me, you know that the brain has a protein in the middle of the brain that when that protein is exposed to certain colors of light, it actually changes the makeup of that protein, and it does something. He said, when you see a blue light, an actual light that is blue, and it goes into your eyes and hit that part of your brain, the protein turns from what's normally sort of a pretzel shape into a mashed up, it looks like it's been in a car accident. He said, and when that happens, it tells your brain, get up, it's time to do something, let's go, let's move. When your brain sees a red light, it actually turns that protein into a flat, straight line, and it makes you tired, makes you sleepy. When you see a green light, it turns that same protein into a nice wave, and it tells you to calm down and relax. And I said to Dr. Medina, I said, well, that's fascinating. That's really interesting. Why does that matter? Well, why is that important? And he said, well, it's easy. Do you ever watch TV before you go to bed? I said, yeah, all the time. He goes, well, stop doing that. You are telling your brain to wake up, and then you're trying to go to sleep. Because it's even more important if you have children. They have a harder and harder and harder time doing that sort of thing. So there's information that we can get from how our brain works that should impact learning, that should impact education. But when I talk to teachers about neuroscience, most of them have never heard any of it. They've never heard any of this research. They've never researched it on their own. They've not gotten it during professional development. They don't know these things. John Medina talks about the importance of pattern recognition. I don't know if you've ever seen these. I play this game with my daughter. There's 1,000 objects in that room, and you're supposed to find the magnifying glass, or supposed to find the sewing machine, or whatever it is. It's sort of a really hard, where's Waldo? But it's pattern recognition that really does something interesting for our brain. You see, when we determine a pattern out of something that didn't seem like it was a pattern, then two things happen in our brain that don't happen any other time in our lives. We actually release two different chemicals at the same time that are highly unusual to be released together. So hopefully you're all seeing the lion in the grass, and that's exactly what we're talking about, recognizing that pattern that comes out of this. When that happens, your brain is actually releasing both dopamine and endorphins. You're excited and you're relaxed at the same time. Now that's something that for most people is a pretty good feeling. You like to find patterns, and what John Medina says is, this actually impacts the part of your brain that helps with creativity and critical thinking. It actually helps you work harder, work longer, work better. It helps you remember longer. It helps you accelerate your learning. Really good stuff happens. He says if you want to do something really good for your students, include pattern recognition in what they do. In fact, he says if you want to do something for your employees, put pictures like this on the wall so that as they're walking by the wall, they actually have to stop and look at it and try to make sense of the pattern. Now you're all seeing the words, yeah, hide and seek? The question is, do you see the horses? Because it's horses and rocks that make that up, not just rocks. When you see it, and some of you are doing it right now, you're leaning forward, and then as soon as you get it, you go, oh, I got it. I see it. Endorphins and dopamine. Here's another one by the same painter, Bev Doolittle drew this. This is called the faces. There are 22 faces in this picture. Do you see them? Because as you start to see them, good things happen in your brain. I'll just show you a couple of them. You can see the silhouettes in the rocks and in the trees. This is the kind of thing we need to include in the curriculum because we know the power of finding patterns, and that's important. We know the power of visual indexing. We know how that works. We know that right now you're all taking in information from me. You're getting the content, and at the same time that you're getting the content, you're getting all of these sensory elements. You're getting the pictures that I'm putting up here. You're getting the sounds, the ways that I'm saying it. You're watching my body. And so these things are actually traveling down the neural pathways into the hippocampus. And as they get to the hippocampus, they split and go into two spots. They go to the spot that holds the sense memory and the spot that holds the content memory. Well, to get them back out, you actually need to pull out one of those two that's stronger, and the other one will come with it. To illustrate this, think just for a moment about a place in your past, in your childhood, that you really have a fond memory of. Think of maybe your grandparents' house or your parents' house or someplace where you really have a good memory. The odds are you can also picture what it looked like. You might be able to hear the sounds that were there. You might even be able to smell the smells from that time when you were a child growing up in that place. That's the power of visual indexing. Now, I can mess with your visual indexing. We can do this because we know how the brain works. I want you to try something for me. I'm about to show you a list, and what I want you to do is I want you to take that list and I want you to read it to the person next to you. I want you to read it top to bottom, and I want you to read it loudly, okay? But here's the key. Read it as fast as you can, as absolutely fast as you can. There's one last piece that I want to give you, though. I want you to read to that person the color, not the word, okay? As fast as you can to the person next to you, go. It's not easy, is it? Now, for my psychology teachers in the room, you know the Stroop test. You've probably given this to your students. The reason the Stroop test is so difficult is because I'm talking about two competing memories from a time that you learned a long, long time ago, about the same time. You probably learned language about the same time you learned color. It was within the same 3-year period or so. And so those are deeply embedded in your brain. And I'm asking you to take two things that you have known for a very long time and have them compete with each other. And it's very difficult to do. We know more about the brain than we have ever known before. We know from that research things like the forget curve. The forget curve is something we all have. After you get a piece of information, you will forget it within a certain period of time. However, if you're reminded of that information just before you forget it, you'll actually remember it a little bit longer. And then if you're reminded again just before you forget it, you'll remember a little bit longer. If you do that 7 times, you will have something for about a 2-year period. And then if you're reminded of it year after year after year 7 more times, you'll have it for life. Most research scientists would tell you you need to be reminded of something over a 7-year period, at least once a year, 7 times, and then you'll have it forever. Well, you can see the first problem, right? We have our students for what, a semester? And then we don't see them again. How often do you talk to the professors who are going to have them later to make sure that they're reinforcing the stuff that you've covered? That very rarely happens. But if you really think about this, for students, how hard is this to begin to remember things that are important? We start asking, why is it you don't remember something from last semester? It was foundational, it was crucial, I'm scaffolding on that, and our students don't get it. You know how they can get it? Technology. We can use a program called Head Magnet. Head Magnet will assess your forget curve. It will figure out how quickly you forget things, and then it allows you to put in a simple card that says this is important, and it will pop up that flashcard just before you're about to forget something. And then you read it, you look at it, you put it away, and then you wait, and so you're emailing or whatever, and all of a sudden, boop, it pops up again. All right, I got to read that. Remember that? Got it. Put it away. It will come up again based on your forget curve. We can't do that for our students individually. We don't have the time. We're not scalable. We can't do that, but technology can. There are things that we know about how the brain works, about how learning happens, and we've got to start implementing that. We know about social learning, for example. Vygotsky started talking about this 100 years ago. And people have finally started to understand the value of being social in an environment. We know, for example, that the conjugation of verbs for 2 years is not how most people want to learn a language. That's not helpful to most people. If you put it in a social context, all of a sudden it makes a difference. You know who really took advantage of that? The mixer. This is the Mixer, where you can go into the Mixer for free, and you can connect with another person in any country in the world that speaks that language natively, and they will teach you their language, and you will teach them yours. You do it over Skype, which is free, and you begin to learn socially, because we know the power of social learning. We know how to make this work, and this is something that we can do with technology that we couldn't do otherwise. So as you look at what we know about good learning. The problem is that as we look at this, we've had two people who have been dealing and dominating the argument for way too long. So I want to talk about the reasonable people for a minute. You see, we've had on one side of the argument, you have the evangelists, those who are over-promising and under-delivering. Those who are saying, hey, we can change the whole world with technology. We can do everything with technology. It's all about technology. But yet they have a hard time explaining how it's actually going to work. And then on the other side, you have what Mark Milliron calls the cave people. Cave people, colleagues against virtually everything. Think right now of a cave person in your life. If you can't think of one, you might be the cave person, all right? Those people exist aplenty in education. The people who say, no technology, forget technology. We've been doing this the way we've been doing it for 300 years, 3,000 years. This is the way we got to keep doing it. That doesn't make any sense. It's a fallacy in reasoning. And yet, we have those two sides that are dominating the conversation. We've got to get back to the middle, to the people who are actually working. Otherwise, we're just going to keep getting hammered time after time after time. When you start looking at what education is and what it can be, online education at its best for the last decade has been this. It's been videos and simulations. The videos of talking heads, we know that's not a good way to learn, but that's been the best for online education for a long time. And we're finally understanding that we can do better. Unfortunately, the worst of online education over the last 10 years has been even worse. It's just text under glass. It's just reading a book on a computer. That's not the best way to make use of this modality. We can do so many other things. But that's what's dominated the conversation. And as a result of that, you start to look at the work of guys like Mark Edmondson. He actually wrote a piece in the New York Times that said, can't we all just admit that online learning doesn't work? Can't we all just agree that online learning isn't going to be something that's ever going to happen? Now, he's a professor at Virginia. He teaches English, so it was very well written. Unfortunately, I disagree with every part of it because he also then made the claim, he said, can't we all just admit the best possible way to learn is through the great lecture? That it's all about the great lecturer who can motivate and inspire and give you all these reasons to go on and to learn and to, can't we just admit that? And I think a lot of people agree with him. In the US, 50% of all teaching takes place in the lecture format. We are still lecturing 50% of the time. So a lot of people would contend, hey, that's right, that's how I was taught, that's why we're going to keep teaching. Even though we know, we got people out there who are saying, even if the lecture is charismatic, holding the attention of several hundred students for an entire lecture of 50 minutes is no longer possible. You have guys like Dr. Eric Mazur, the physicist at Harvard, who actually is hooking students up to these machines to measure brain activity during a week. And what happens is the same thing happens with every single student time after time. Now, these are Harvard students. They're going to hear some of the great minds in the world. They're hearing these lectures from these amazing professors. And what's happening in their brains? This is the pattern you see almost every single time. When you look at the students in their classroom time, look at their brain activity. Almost nothing. The only other time their brains look like that is when they're watching television. In fact, look at their brains when they're sleeping. You have more brain activity when you're sleeping than when you're sitting in a lecture. We've got to start changing what we know to be true. That's why you've got guys like Bill Gates saying college should be a fallback option. That's why you've got Peter Thiel, who is offering people money not to go to the university. He's saying that it actually hurts you. That's why Oxford's study that came out that said, here are the skills that people need. Unfortunately, when they leave education, they're only having it 15% of the time. That's the same reason the IBM executives were surveyed. They said, creativity is what we need. Creativity is going to save us. Creativity is going to move us into the next generation. The problem, 80% of the time, we can't find creatives, especially if they've just come out of the college or university. All they know is how to follow the template. All they know is how to ask for, can I see an example of that so that I know what to do next time? Instead of being creative on their own. That's why guys like John Taylor Gatto, who would suggest we should burn down the schools, that schools are actually in place to stop you from being creative. That's why he loves this quote from an IBM exec who said, our country became computer literate by self-teaching. He went on to say, if schools had preempted the right to teach computer use, we would be in a horrible mess right now. That schools don't teach stuff that matters. Schools don't teach in ways that matters. That's why we've got all these critics that are out there talking about this, about education. That's why John Seeley Brown, who graduated from an Ivy League school, said, you know, I would rather hire a World of Warcraft level 70 guildmaster than I would a Harvard MBA. Now, Harvard had something to say about that. They called him and they said, are you serious? He said, I'm very serious. They have gone through an immersive leadership program that you don't give your students, and they do it over the course of time. They learn how to do all of these different things. And so we're getting hammered from multiple places. Games work. Talk to a professor about games, and you'll get a lot of people that go, oh, not in my class. We don't play games in my class. Gamification, oh, well, that's just silliness. This is Enter Zon. It was built by a man named Dr. Zhao at Michigan State. He wanted to teach conversational Chinese, so he built a massive online role-playing game. In this environment, you go in using Skype, you speak Chinese. Now, you're dropped in the middle of virtual China wearing nothing but a t-shirt and shorts, okay? You have to feed yourself, you have to clothe yourself, you have to find a job, you have to make friends, you have to do all of these things speaking Chinese. The only help you get is that little avatar guy that follows you in a newspaper that comes to you every day. Now, once that happens, you go around trying to speak Chinese. People are learning conversational Chinese in 3.5 weeks. It normally takes them 2 semesters to learn that much in a traditional classroom. The learning is accelerated, they're remembering it longer, and they're getting it in a contextual manner. We know about learning, we know about technology, we know about games. It's time to start using this stuff, because it matters. That all leads, by the way, to data. I can tell you, because of our learning platform, we have millions of enrollments. We're a cloud-based solution, so we have access to all of this. I can tell you in the first 10 days of a class if a student's going to drop or not based on their activity. And I can tell you with tremendous certainty, about 90% of the time I'm going to get that right. We can tell you that because of data. We can tell you about outcomes measures and which sections are hurting the outcomes measures, why students aren't reaching proficiency because of certain disciplines or because of certain teachers or because of certain classrooms or whatever it might be. I can tell you that because of data. I can tell you what the best class size is to get students to complete. That was my dissertation. It's been a while since I've done this, but I can tell you based on large, small, and classes, the students who are in class sizes of about 25 to 35, that's your ultimate number for an online class. Those are the students who complete at the highest level. They also get the best grades. I can tell you when students do communicate with other people, if they're going to be successful. We can see that. We can see just how much connection happens between two people. We can look at the thickness of these bands and say, oh, they're communicating a lot, but we can then correlate it out to the students who are doing well versus those that are failing or those that are dropping. Data gives us that. And technology makes data possible. We know so much more about teaching and learning than we've ever known. So when it comes to the MOOC conversation, which is a piece of what we're talking about, it's time to look at what we know to be best for education. There are a lot of issues. You've already heard some of these from some of the people up here. A couple that I think are really significant. Is it authentic? Is the MOOC authentic? You know, a lot of people talk about it being a flipped model. A true flipped model is where you do first and then you look for the instruction later. It's not that you just simply watch a video of a professor at some other time. It's that you actually do something first, and that drives you to want to learn about it in other places. And is a video one way to look at that? Yeah, that's one way to get the information. It should not be the only. Is reading it one way? Sure, but it should not be the only. So there's a lot of issues here. Peer review is difficult. Really good peer review, now you can require it if you want to, but it's still very hard. You've got to have people who know what they're talking about. Have you been in a group where you were the smartest person and someone else was reviewing you? You thought, why in the world do you review? You don't know anything about this. Have you been in a group where nobody knew anything about the topic and you were expected to review each other on it? Peer review is hard. There are a lot of issues with the current version of MOOCs. Now, there are guys who are saying, hey, forget MOOCs. I've been doing this for a long time. John Boyer at Virginia Tech, he treats every class like it's late night with David Letterman. He's got 2,600 students every semester, and he goes out every single classroom. He's got a wait list of 500 students long just to get into this class. People are so excited about it. He's saying, forget MOOCs, I'll teach 2,500 students per class. The problem is not everybody's got a John Boyer. You've got the guys at Udacity, you got Saul Khan saying, no, well then we'll just do what we're doing with MOOCs. We will just provide ourselves these talking heads on videos. That's what'll make the difference. And there are a lot of people who are taking these classes, and there's very few that are finishing. That's why their retention rates are 5%, 6%. Because it's not something that works for anybody but the autodidactic learner. You know, in the US, we had a famous one. His name was Abraham Lincoln. He was able to take the books back to his house and learn all by himself. He didn't need help from anyone else. And that's what their model today happens to be. We've got to get past that. You've got the Dukes and the UNC, University of North Carolina, who are saying, all right, well, forget the MOOC concept. Let's instead bring you into a consortium where we'll allow you, even though you're not a Duke student, we'll allow you to have a Duke course on your transcript. The cost of that, $4,000. But we'll give you small class sizes. It'll be personal. It'll be the Duke experience, and you can have that. We've got to change the way that we're thinking about some of these things and think about what's best for learners and what's best for learning. I think that there is a solution. If we start to use the things that we know about education, about the brain, about learning, we can create the second version of MOOCs, MOOCs v2. And when we get to that, I would contend if we do it in a way that utilizes curriculum integration and games and student engagement, we're going to find a good experience. Now, I've done this, and I really think this is how we flip the MOOC. Okay, this is literally how we do it. I was involved in a class where it was a court and communication class, and the students actually killed me during one of the weekends of this class. All right, then we had a trial. They performed the trial. They actually were the judge, they were the jury, they were the prosecution, they were the defense. They went in, and we developed for them all kinds of game mechanic elements that they needed, the tools that they needed in order to meet the outcomes that they had. The difference was it wasn't just me. I also had a forensic science teacher who was involved in this. I had a journalism teacher who was involved in this. And we used that experience as a platform for all of these students to have an experience that was meaningful to their discipline and their major, even though we all experienced it together. We utilized narrative that kind of tied everybody together, but they all had a part. They all played an actor or role in this. We can do this as a MOOC. I'm building one right now with a group of schools in Iowa. And basically it works like this. We've got a subject matter expert who's going to create an experience. And this experience, in this case, we're going to replicate the one I just told you about. And so we're going to replicate a courtroom drama. And that is going to be used in conjunction with some other subject matter experts, other teachers who say, I need to have these things take place in order for my students to reach the outcomes that they need to reach. Then it's going to be, we're going to use multimedia experts and instructional designers that are going to send out information. It's going to then go to the instructors who are going to teach these. In addition to getting teaching elements coming from the big kind of global experience, they're going to get local instruction as well. That's going to go out to the students who are going to give feedback to the group leaders. It's going to be very cyclical. It's going to go up and down, backwards and forwards. It's going to be very authentic. It's going to be very much about the flipped model. It's not just a bunch of people telling down so that the others may or may not learn. The other one of these that I'm working on for spring of next year is based on this. This is what I'm going to end with. 96 hours ago, this man died in an airport, JFK. Within 48 hours, 10,000 people around the planet had died of seemingly the same thing, but nobody knows what it is. People are starting to panic, obviously, because if this keeps up, within 48 weeks, 2.6 billion people will be dead. They're going to have an emergency summit in Atlanta for the CDC, but how are we going to deal with this? That's the question people are going to be asking in the game that I'm calling Contagion. It's going to be a global experience. It's going to really impact a lot of different majors. People who are in political science are going to have to start to figure out, do we quarantine, do we not? How does this affect the economies of our local governments or whatever it might be? People who are in science are going to have to figure out, what is the problem? Is it a virus? Is it bacteria? How are we going to deal with that? Is this something that was done on purpose, or is it something that just happened accidentally? There's going to be all kinds of learning that comes out of this environment. That's how we get to MOOC v2. See, the key to all of this is doing everything that we know to do. Do lectures matter? Sure, they work. Not all the time, but they work. What about MOOCs? Do they work? Sure, sometimes, in the right context, in the right place. How about mobile? Yes. Data? Yes. Using various learning platforms? Yes. What about the kind of tell, show, do, review cycle? Is that important? Yes. What about utilizing augmented reality? Yes. Learning is big. Learning is deeper than it's ever been before. It's time for us to change our paradigm for how we actually do education. Thanks very much for your time.